The cabin fell silent. Every passenger stared as security escorted the woman off the private jet. 12-year-old Naomi stood frozen, her father's hand on her shoulder. She had boarded first class, expecting a simple flight to Atlanta. Instead, she witnessed a stranger's venom, a crowd's complicity, and a revelation that would reshape her understanding of privilege, prejudice, and power forever. Before we dive into this incredible story, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity regardless of how they look, go ahead and hit that like button right now. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications because stories like this need to be heard. Now, let's go back to where it all began and see exactly what happened on that flight. The Miami morning sun blazed through the glass walls of the private aviation terminal, casting golden rectangles across the polished marble floor. Naomi Harper clutched her backpack straps and gazed around the exclusive space with wide, curious eyes. At 12 years old, she had flown many times before, but the excitement never faded. Today felt special. She and her father were heading to Atlanta for her cousin's wedding, and she had spent the entire previous evening picking out the perfect dress, now carefully folded in her small suitcase. Her father, Desmond Harper, stood beside her with the calm presence of a man who had learned long ago that silence often spoke louder than words. He wore a simple navy polo shirt and khaki pants. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed wealth or status. His salt and pepper hair was neatly trimmed, and his dark eyes held a quiet intelligence that came from years of building something from nothing. To anyone passing by, he looked like any other traveler. That was exactly how he preferred it. A young woman in a crisp uniform approached them with a warm smile. "Good morning, Mr. Harper. Welcome back. Your aircraft is ready whenever you are." "Thank you, Melissa," Desmond replied, his voice deep and measured. "We'll head out in just a few minutes." Naomi watched the exchange with pride. She knew her father had worked incredibly hard to reach this point in his life, though he rarely talked about it. Harper Aviation had started as a dream 15 years ago, when Desmond purchased a single-used Gulfstream jet and began offering private charter services. People told him he would fail. They said clients wouldn't trust a black-owned aviation company. They said the industry was too competitive, too exclusive, too closed off to someone like him. But Desmond Harper had never been someone who listened to limitations. Now, Harper Aviation owned a fleet of 12 aircraft and served clients across the country. The company was known for impeccable service, safety, and something increasingly rare in the luxury travel industry: genuine respect for every passenger, regardless of their background. Naomi adjusted her glasses and pulled out the book she had been reading, a biography of Rosa Parks. She had become fascinated with the civil rights movement after a school project, and her father had encouraged her curiosity. "History teaches us who we are," he often said, "and who we can become." The terminal doors slid open, and Naomi glanced up from her book. A woman strode in, her heels clicking sharply against the marble. She wore an expensive cream-colored suit, oversized sunglasses perched on her perfectly styled blonde hair, and carried a designer handbag that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Everything about her posture screamed entitlement. This was Gwyneth Palmer, though Naomi didn't know her name yet. Gwyneth worked in luxury real estate, catering to the wealthiest clients in South Florida. She had paid $23,000 for this flight to Atlanta, a business expense she would write off without a second thought. In her world, money bought comfort, exclusivity, and distance from people she considered beneath her. Gwyneth barely glanced at the staff as she approached the check-in desk. Her eyes swept the terminal, cataloging everything with the practiced assessment of someone who constantly measured her surroundings against her own perceived superiority. When her gaze landed on Naomi and Desmond, Something flickered across her face. Not quite disgust, but close. A tightening around her mouth, a slight narrowing of her eyes. She looked away quickly, but not before Naomi noticed. The girl felt a familiar flutter in her stomach. She had experienced that look before. In stores where security guards followed her. In restaurants where hostesses seemed surprised she was dining there. In her own school, where some parents gave her father that same measured stare during pickup. She didn't fully understand it yet, but she felt it. The weight of being judged for something she couldn't control. Desmond noticed too. He always did. He placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder and squeezed once. A silent message. "I'm here. You're safe. Ready, sweetheart?" he asked. Naomi nodded, tucking her book into her backpack. They walked toward the tarmac entrance, where the Gulfstream G650 waited, its white exterior gleaming in the sunlight. The aircraft was beautiful, sleek, and powerful, with seating for 12 passengers in a configuration that blurred the line between first class and private luxury. Every detail had been designed for comfort. Cream leather seats, polished wood accents, mood lighting, and amenities that rivaled five-star hotels. As they approached the aircraft stairs, another passenger arrived. Claudette Washington was a woman in her late 60s, with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun. She had worked as a nurse for 40 years before retiring, and she carried herself with the dignity of someone who had spent a lifetime caring for others. She smiled warmly at Naomi as they reached the stairs at the same time. "Good morning, sweetheart," Claudette said. "Excited for the flight?" "Yes, ma'am," Naomi replied politely. "That's a lovely backpack. I like the colors." Naomi beamed. Her backpack was covered in patches from different places she had visited. Her favorite was a small, embroidered airplane with the words "Future Pilot" stitched beneath it. Behind them, Gwyneth Palmer had finished checking in and was making her way toward the aircraft. She walked with the brisk efficiency of someone accustomed to being first, best, most important. When she saw the small group at the stairs, she slowed slightly, her expression souring. Another passenger, Preston Whitmore, emerged from the terminal. He was a well-dressed man in his early 50s, a corporate attorney with silver temples and an expensive watch. He had the careful neutrality of someone who had learned to navigate uncomfortable situations by remaining diplomatically silent. He nodded politely at everyone and fell into line. The boarding process began. Melissa, the terminal attendant, smiled at Naomi. "Ladies first," she said warmly, gesturing for the girl to go ahead. Naomi climbed the stairs carefully, her father right behind her. She had no idea that this simple act, this ordinary moment of a child boarding an airplane, was about to trigger a confrontation that would change everything. Inside the cabin, Naomi took in the beautiful interior. The seats were arranged in a spacious configuration, with the front row offering the most legroom and the best views. She had always loved sitting by the window, watching the world shrink beneath her. Without hesitation, she made her way to the first row and slid into the window seat, setting her backpack at her feet. Desmond took the aisle seat beside her, pulling out a newspaper. To any observer, they looked like any father and daughter settling in for a flight. Nothing unusual, nothing worth noting. But when Gwyneth Palmer stepped into the cabin and saw Naomi sitting in what she considered the premium seat, her entire demeanor shifted. Her jaw tightened, her eyes hardened. And in that moment, she made a decision that would cost her more than she could possibly imagine. Gwyneth Palmer paused in the aisle, her designer handbag hanging from the crook of her arm, and stared directly at Naomi. The girl looked up, confused by the sudden attention. For a long moment, Gwyneth said nothing. She simply stood there, blocking the aisle, her gaze moving from Naomi to Desmond and back again. "Excuse me, sweetheart," Gwyneth finally said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I think you might be in the wrong seat." Naomi blinked. Mom, that seat, Gwyneth continued, pointing with one perfectly manicured finger. First row. I believe there might be some confusion about your assigned seating. Desmond lowered his newspaper slightly, but said nothing. He simply watched. Naomi felt her cheeks grow warm. No, ma'am. This is my seat. I always sit here. Gwyneth's smile didn't reach her eyes. Are you sure about that? First-class seats are usually reserved for, well, certain passengers. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable further back. The implication hung in the air, like smoke. Claudette Washington, settling into a seat 2 rows behind, went very still. Preston Whitmore glanced up from his phone, his expression carefully neutral. The flight attendant, Bethany Caldwell, had just entered the cabin and froze when she heard the exchange. Naomi's hands tightened on the armrests. She had faced this before. This subtle suggestion that she didn't belong somewhere. In stores, in restaurants, in spaces where her mere presence seemed to challenge someone's sense of order. But never quite so directly. Never so publicly. I'm sure. Naomi said quietly, "This is my seat." Gwyneth's pleasant facade began to crack. Well, I find that rather odd. This is a premium flight. Very exclusive. Very expensive. And I can't help but notice that you seem. She paused, searching for words that would wound without being overtly crude. Out of place. Desmond carefully folded his newspaper and set it on his lap. He turned his head slowly toward Gwyneth, his expression unreadable. Is there a problem, ma'am? Gwyneth transferred her gaze to him, and in that moment, she made her second mistake. She assumed, because Desmond wore casual clothes, because he spoke quietly, because he was black and sitting next to a young black girl, she constructed an entire narrative in her mind. He was the help, or a guardian, or someone taking advantage of a charitable program. Certainly not someone with authority. Sir, Gwyneth said, her tone shifting to one of exaggerated patience. Simply trying to ensure that everyone is in their correct seat. Perhaps you could help this child find where she actually belongs. Bethany, the flight attendant, finally found her voice. Mom, I can assure you that all passengers have their assigned seats. There's no confusion. Gwyneth didn't even look at her. Her focus remained on Desmond. I'm sure there's been some kind of mix-up. These things happen. But I paid a significant amount of money for this flight, and I expect proper protocols to be followed. Desmond's voice remained calm, almost gentle. My daughter is exactly where she needs to be. Your daughter, Gwyneth repeated, and something ugly flickered across her face. Not surprise at the relationship, but something darker. A confirmation of her prejudices, perhaps. Or simply irritation that this man dared to challenge her. Well, that's lovely. Family travel is important. But surely you understand that seating arrangements on premium flights are based on certain criteria. Preston Whitmore shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He knew he should say something. He could feel the wrongness of this moment, the way it was spiraling into something toxic, but he remained silent. Caught in the paralysis of someone who wanted to avoid conflict more than he wanted to do what was right. Claudette Washington had no such hesitation. That's completely inappropriate, she said firmly from her seat. This young lady has every right to sit wherever she's assigned. Gwyneth spun around, her expression hardening. I wasn't speaking to you. Perhaps you should be, Claudette replied. Because what you're doing right now is inexcusable. Gwyneth's cheeks flushed. I am simply ensuring that proper standards are maintained. If you can't understand that, then perhaps you shouldn't be on premium flights either. The words landed like stones. Naomi felt tears prickling behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had learned from her father that showing emotion in moments like this sometimes gave people like Gwyneth exactly what they wanted. Power, validation, the satisfaction of knowing they had wounded someone. Desmond placed his hand gently on his daughter's knee, a steadying touch. "Breathe," he whispered, so quietly only she could hear. Bethany stepped forward, her professional composure beginning to fray. "Mom, I need to ask you to take your seat so we can prepare for departure." "I'll take my seat when this situation is resolved," Gwyneth snapped. "I refuse to fly in discomfort because someone allowed passengers, who clearly don't belong in first class, to take premium seating." The cabin had gone completely silent except for the soft hum of the aircraft systems powering up. Every passenger was now acutely aware of the confrontation. Some stared openly. Others studied their phones with exaggerated concentration, pretending not to hear. Gwyneth moved closer to Naomi's seat, looming over the girl. "Sweetheart, I'm going to need you to move. Now." Naomi looked up at her father, confusion and hurt swimming in her dark eyes. "Dad." Desmond's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He met Gwyneth's gaze with a steadiness that would have warned a more observant person. "My daughter is not moving." "Then I'll speak to whoever is in charge of this flight," Gwyneth said, her voice rising, "because this is absolutely unacceptable. I have rights as a paying passenger." "So does she," Desmond replied quietly. Gwyneth laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Does she? Really? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like someone is taking advantage of relaxed standards, and I won't stand for it." She turned to Bethany, her expression imperious. "I want to speak to the captain. Immediately." Bethany's hands trembled slightly as she nodded. "I'll see if Captain Martinez can come back here." As Bethany hurried toward the cockpit, Gwyneth settled into the seat directly behind Naomi, making a show of her displeasure. She pulled out her phone and began typing furiously, muttering under her breath about declining standards and inappropriate passengers. Naomi stared out the window, fighting to keep her breathing steady. She felt small, exposed, like everyone in the cabin was judging her, questioning whether she deserved to be there. It didn't matter that her father owned the plane. It didn't matter that she had flown countless times before. In this moment, she was just a 12-year-old black girl being told she didn't belong. Desmond leaned close to her ear. "You know who you are," he whispered. "Don't let anyone make you forget that." But Naomi wasn't sure she did know. Not really. Not when the world kept sending her messages that said otherwise. Behind them, Gwyneth continued her quiet tirade, now speaking to Preston in a voice just loud enough for others to hear. "I don't understand how this airline maintains its reputation if they let just anyone board. There are standards for a reason. Exclusivity means something. Or at least it should." Preston cleared his throat uncomfortably, but said nothing. His silence was its own form of complicity. The cockpit door opened, and Captain Jerome Martinez emerged. He was a man in his early 40s with dark hair, kind eyes, and the confident bearing of someone who had logged thousands of flight hours. He had worked for Harper Aviation for 8 years and respected Desmond Harper more than almost anyone he had ever met. But as he stepped into the cabin, he wore his professional mask, revealing nothing. He had received a specific signal from Desmond moments earlier. A discreet button pressed on the armrest that indicated a situation requiring attention. Jerome knew exactly what was happening, and he knew exactly how this was going to end. Captain Jerome Martinez surveyed the cabin with practiced efficiency, his pilot's training allowing him to assess complex situations quickly. The tension was palpable. He could see it in Naomi's rigid posture, in Desmond's carefully controlled expression, in the way other passengers studiously avoided making eye contact. And then there was the woman in the seat behind the Harpers, radiating indignation like heat from pavement. "I understand there's a concern about seating arrangements," Jerome said, his voice calm and professional. "How can I help clarify the situation?" Gwyneth immediately stood, smoothing her suit jacket as if preparing for a business presentation. "Captain, Thank you for coming back here. I've been trying to explain to your flight attendant that there's been a serious error in passenger placement. This child," she gestured toward Naomi, without actually looking at her, "is occupying a premium first-class seat, and I have serious concerns about whether proper protocols were followed during boarding." Jerome's expression remained neutral. "I see. And what specific protocol do you believe was violated?" Gwyneth blinked, clearly not expecting the question. "Well, it's obvious, isn't it? First-class seating is reserved for passengers who have paid the appropriate fare. I paid $23,000 for this flight. I expect certain standards. I can assure you that every passenger on this aircraft has been properly cleared for their assigned seating," Jerome replied. "There has been no error. That's simply not possible," Gwyneth insisted, her voice growing sharper. "Look at her. Look at them." She gestured again toward Naomi and Desmond. "Does this seem appropriate to you? Premium aviation attracts a specific clientele. Captain, we pay for exclusivity. We pay for a certain environment." Bethany stood near the galley, her face pale. She had worked in private aviation for 3 years and had encountered difficult passengers before, but never anything quite like this. The naked prejudice in Gwyneth's voice made her stomach turn. Claudette Washington spoke up from her seat. "What you're describing isn't exclusivity. It's discrimination." Gwyneth whirled around. "I told you to stay out of this. This doesn't concern you. It concerns everyone on this aircraft." Claudette shot back. "Because what you're doing is shameful. That child has done absolutely nothing wrong. She's in a seat she doesn't belong in." Gwyneth's composure was slipping now, her voice rising. "And everyone here knows it. Everyone can see it. But apparently, I'm the only one willing to say what we're all thinking." Preston finally spoke, his lawyer's instincts overriding his desire to remain uninvolved. "I don't think you speak for everyone, ma'am." Gwyneth's head snapped toward him. "Oh, don't pretend to be enlightened. This is about standards. This is about maintaining the integrity of premium travel. If we start allowing anyone to sit anywhere, regardless of whether they can actually afford it, then what's the point of first class?" "She can afford it," Desmond said quietly, speaking for only the second time since the confrontation began. All attention turned to him. He remained seated, his posture relaxed, but there was something in his eyes now. A glint of steel beneath the calm. Gwyneth scoffed. "I'm sure you believe that. But there's a difference between discount tickets and actually purchasing premium seating. This flight costs more than most people earn in a month. I find it highly unlikely that—" She trailed off. But the implication was clear. "That what?" Desmond asked, his voice still quiet but with an edge now. "That we could afford to be here." "I'm simply pointing out realities," Gwyneth said, lifting her chin. "Premium aviation has always been exclusive. That's the entire point. And when that exclusivity is compromised, it diminishes the experience for those of us who actually belong here." Naomi made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. Desmond's hand immediately covered hers, squeezing gently. "My daughter belongs here," he said, each word precise and deliberate. "She belongs here more than you can possibly imagine." Gwyneth's eyes narrowed. "And who are you to make that determination? Are you a pilot? Are you staff? Because if you're just another passenger, then you have no authority to decide who belongs where." Jerome cleared his throat. "Actually, ma'am, Mr. Harper has considerable authority regarding passenger placement on this aircraft." Gwyneth barely glanced at him. "I don't care what his title is. I want someone in actual management to address this situation. I want guarantees that proper procedures are being followed. And frankly, I want an explanation for why I'm being subjected to this uncomfortable situation." Bethany stepped forward, her voice shaking slightly. "Ma'am, I think you need to understand something. I understand perfectly. Gwyneth interrupted. I understand that standards have dropped. I understand that inclusivity has been taken too far. I understand that people who have no business being in premium spaces are being allowed to take seats from those who actually earned them. Her words hung in the air like poison gas. Naomi's shoulders began to shake. Tears streamed down her face now, and she no longer had the strength to hold them back. She was 12 years old, sitting on her father's airplane, and being told by a complete stranger that she was worthless, that she didn't deserve to exist in this space, that her very presence was an offense. Desmond's composure finally cracked. Not dramatically, not with raised voices or sudden movements, but something in his eyes shifted, hardened. He reached up and pressed a button on the overhead panel, a discreet signal that only Jerome understood. The captain straightened. Miss Palmer, I'm going to need you to take your seat immediately. I am in my seat, Gwyneth snapped. What I need is for you to address this situation properly. Remove this child from premium seating, or I will be filing a formal complaint with whatever agency oversees your operation. I will be demanding a full refund, and I will be making certain that everyone in my professional network knows about the declining standards of this airline. Jerome glanced at Desmond, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Mom, Jerome said, his voice taking on a different quality now. I think there's something you should know about this flight. I know everything I need to know, Gwyneth said dismissively. I know that I'm being asked to tolerate an unacceptable situation. I know that instead of addressing my legitimate concerns, you're defending the indefensible. And I know that when we land in Atlanta, I will be speaking to every person in your chain of command until this is made right. Bethany moved closer to Jerome, her voice barely above a whisper. Should I? Jerome nodded. Yes, she needs to know. Gwyneth looked between them, suspicion crossing her face. Needs to know what? Bethany swallowed hard. Her heart was pounding. She had never been in a situation quite like this, had never had to deliver information that she knew would detonate like a bomb. But it had to be done. Mom, Bethany said, her voice steadier now. The gentleman you've been speaking to, Mr. Desmond Harper. He's not just another passenger. Gwyneth waved her hand dismissively. I don't care if he's a frequent flyer. That doesn't change the fact that his daughter is inappropriately seated. He owns this aircraft, Bethany continued. He owns this entire company, Harper Aviation. This is his jet. These are his employees. And that young girl you've been insulting is his daughter, who has every right to sit anywhere on this plane because her father built this entire business from the ground up. The cabin fell into absolute silence. Not a single passenger moved. Not a single breath seemed to be taken. Gwyneth's face went through a remarkable transformation. First confusion, then disbelief, then a dawning horror as the full implications of what she had done crashed over her like a wave. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. That's not. It's completely true, Jerome said quietly. Mr. Harper founded Harper Aviation 15 years ago. He personally oversees every aspect of this company's operations. And you've spent the last 10 minutes insulting his daughter and demanding that she be removed from her own father's aircraft. Preston Whitmore closed his eyes and muttered something under his breath. Claudette Washington sat back in her seat, a grim satisfaction on her face. Other passengers stared openly now, watching Gwyneth's public humiliation unfold. Gwyneth's expensive handbag slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a soft thud. Her perfectly composed expression shattered. I didn't. How was I supposed to know? Has not. He doesn't look. She caught herself, but it was too late. Everyone heard what she almost said, what she would have said if social conditioning hadn't stopped her tongue at the last second. Desmond finally stood. He moved slowly, deliberately, his 6'2" frame unfolding with quiet dignity. He turned to face Gwyneth directly, and when he spoke, his voice was soft but carried the weight of accumulated pain. Decades of microaggressions and overt racism, years of being told he didn't belong in spaces he had literally built himself. "What exactly don't I look like, Miss Palmer?" Gwyneth Palmer's face had gone from flushed to pale in a matter of seconds. She stood frozen in the aisle, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly, searching for words that might salvage this catastrophic situation. But there were no words, no clever explanations, no socially acceptable way to walk back what she had revealed about herself. Desmond Harper remained standing, his gaze steady and unwavering. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His very presence, his calm authority, his undeniable ownership of this entire aircraft, spoke volumes that shouting never could. "I'm waiting for an answer," Desmond said quietly. "What exactly don't I look like?" That's not what I meant," Gwyneth stammered, her usual confidence completely evaporated. "I simply meant that I didn't realize you were. I had no way of knowing that you were the owner," Desmond finished for her. "Is that what you're trying to say? That if you had known I owned this company, you would have treated my daughter differently?" Gwyneth reached down to retrieve her handbag, her hands shaking. "You have to understand. From my perspective, from your perspective, what exactly?" Desmond took a step closer, still calm, still controlled. "From your perspective, my 12-year-old daughter, sitting quietly with a book, bothering no one, deserved to be humiliated? Deserved to be told she didn't belong? Deserved to be treated like her very existence was an insult to you?" Naomi had turned in her seat, watching her father with wide eyes. She had seen him handle difficult situations before, had watched him navigate business conflicts with grace and firmness, but she had never seen this particular expression on his face. This careful containment of rage, this precise articulation of pain. Gwyneth tried again. "Mr. Harper, I sincerely apologize for any misunderstanding. If I had known who you were, I would never have." "And that," Desmond interrupted, his voice cutting clean through her explanation, "is exactly the problem, isn't it? If you had known who I was, you would have changed your behavior. Not because what you were doing was wrong, but because you realized I had power. Your apology isn't for hurting my daughter. It's for making a tactical error that might cost you something." Preston Whitmore shifted in his seat. He knew he needed to speak up, needed to say something, but the moment felt too large, too charged. Still, his conscience wouldn't let him remain silent any longer. "Mr. Harper is absolutely right," he said, his lawyer's voice steady. "What we just witnessed was inexcusable, regardless of anyone's identity or position." Gwyneth shot him a betrayed look. "You stayed quiet this entire time. You didn't say anything either." "You're right," Preston acknowledged, meeting her gaze. "And that was wrong of me. I should have spoken up immediately when you began attacking this child. My silence was cowardice, and I apologize for that." He turned to Naomi. "Young lady, I'm sorry. I didn't defend you when I should have. What happened to you was wrong, and no one should have to experience that." Naomi nodded slightly, but she couldn't find words to respond. Her throat felt tight, her chest heavy. She looked at her father, seeking reassurance, seeking safety. Desmond returned to his seat and put his arm around his daughter, pulling her close. She leaned into him, finally letting herself feel the full weight of what had just happened. The tears came freely now, silent and hot, streaming down her face. "It's okay, baby," Desmond murmured into her hair. "You're safe. I've got you. But before we continue with what happened next, I want to pause here and ask you something important. If you were on this flight, would you have spoken up immediately like Claudette did? Would you have remained silent like Preston? Or something in between? Comment the number 1 if you believe every single person on that aircraft had a responsibility to defend Naomi the moment Gwyneth started her attack. And while you're at it, go ahead and hit that like button if you think what Gwyneth did deserves real consequences. Subscribe if you want to see more stories that expose discrimination and celebrate people who stand up against it. Because what happens next is going to surprise you. The question is, how far will Desmond go to hold Gwyneth accountable? Will he show mercy, or will he make sure she faces the full consequences of her prejudice? Let's find out. Bethany approached Desmond tentatively. "Mr. Harper, I am so deeply sorry. I should have intervened more forcefully from the beginning. I should have made it clear immediately that Miss Palmer's behavior was unacceptable." Desmond looked up at her, and his expression softened slightly. "Bethany, you're not the one who needs to apologize. You were put in an impossible position. What I'm more concerned about is why someone like Miss Palmer felt comfortable behaving this way in the first place. What does that say about the environment we've created?" "That's not fair," Gwyneth interjected, her defensive instincts kicking back in now that the initial shock was wearing off. "You can't blame me for not knowing your personal background. How was I supposed to recognize you? You're dressed like a regular person. You weren't in a suit. You weren't displaying any markers of authority. Anyone would have made the same assumption." The cabin went silent again. Several passengers audibly gasped at Gwyneth's continued inability to understand what she had done wrong. Claudette Washington stood up from her seat. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but her voice carried the force of someone who had spent a lifetime witnessing injustice. "Mom, do you hear yourself? Do you understand what you keep saying?" Gwyneth turned to face her. "I'm simply explaining that context matters. If Mr. Harper had presented himself in a way that made his status clear, none of this would have happened." "You're right," Desmond said, his voice dangerously quiet. "If I had conformed to your expectations of what a successful businessman should look like, if I had worn the right clothes, carried the right accessories, performed the right version of wealth and authority, you might have treated me with basic respect. But my daughter? Would that have changed anything for her? Or would you have still looked at her and seen someone who didn't belong?" Gwyneth opened her mouth, then closed it. She had no answer, because they both knew the truth. Desmond stood again, and this time he addressed the entire cabin. "I started Harper Aviation 15 years ago with one aircraft and a dream. I was told by banks that I wasn't a good risk. I was told by industry veterans that private aviation wouldn't accept a black-owned company. I was told by potential clients that they'd prefer to fly with more established operations." He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. "But I built this company anyway. I built it on principles of excellence, safety, and treating every single person who walks through our doors with dignity. From the passenger who charters a single flight to the repeat clients who fly with us monthly. From the cleaning crew who maintains our aircraft to the executives who book corporate travel, everyone matters. Everyone deserves respect." Naomi had stopped crying now. She watched her father with a mixture of pride and sadness, understanding for perhaps the first time the weight he carried, the battles he fought every single day just to exist in spaces that people like Gwyneth believed belonged exclusively to them. Desmond continued, "Miss Palmer, you didn't just insult my daughter today. You revealed something much deeper. You revealed that in your worldview, certain people are automatically suspect. Certain people need to prove they belong. Certain people will never be given the benefit of the doubt, no matter what they've accomplished, because their skin color tells you everything you think you need to know." "That's not true," Gwyneth protested weakly. "I'm not. I don't think that way. I have black friends. I support equality." "Do you?" Desmond asked. "Because when you saw my daughter sitting in that seat, you didn't assume she was a valued passenger. You didn't assume her presence was legitimate. You immediately decided she was out of place, and you felt entitled to humiliate a child to make your point. That's not equality. That's not friendship. That's prejudice. Pure and simple. Jerome stepped forward. Mr. Harper, what would you like me to do? Desmond was quiet for a long moment, his arm still around Naomi. She looked up at him, waiting to see what he would decide. Finally, he spoke. Captain Martinez, what are our options for managing this situation? Jerome chose his words carefully. We can continue to Atlanta as scheduled with all current passengers aboard. We can return to Miami and arrange alternative transportation for anyone. Or we can file an incident report and take appropriate action once we land. The decision is yours, sir. Everyone waited. The aircraft's engines hummed quietly, ready for departure. Gwyneth stood perfectly still, barely breathing, her entire body tense with anticipation of judgment. Desmond Harper sat back down beside his daughter, pulling her close against his side. Naomi's tears had dried, leaving pale tracks on her brown skin. She felt exhausted, hollowed out by the emotional assault she had endured. But she also felt something else, something new and unfamiliar, a fierce pride in her father, and a growing understanding of the strength it took to face this kind of hatred with dignity intact. Dad, she whispered, her voice still shaky. What are you going to do? Desmond looked down at her, his expression softening. What do you think I should do? Naomi glanced over her shoulder at Gwyneth, who stood frozen in the aisle, her expensive clothes suddenly seeming like a costume, her confidence stripped away to reveal something much smaller and more afraid. For a moment, Naomi felt something unexpected. Pity. Not forgiveness, but an understanding that this woman was trapped in a worldview so narrow and toxic that it had led her to this moment of public shame. I don't know, Naomi admitted. I want her to understand what she did was wrong, but I don't know if she can. Desmond nodded slowly. That's a very wise observation, sweetheart. You can't force understanding on someone who isn't ready to receive it. He raised his voice so everyone in the cabin could hear. Miss Palmer, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say. Gwyneth nodded mutely, her face still pale. I'm not going to throw you off this aircraft right now, Desmond continued. Not because you deserve compassion, but because my daughter doesn't need to witness that kind of spectacle. She's already been through enough today, and I won't add to her trauma just to satisfy my own anger. Gwyneth's shoulders sagged with relief. Thank you, Mr. Harper. I promise, Desmond held up one hand, silencing her. I'm not finished. You will remain on this flight to Atlanta, but you will not speak unless spoken to. You will not interact with my daughter in any way. You will sit in your seat and you will think very carefully about what brought you to this moment. Because when we land, there will be consequences. What kind of consequences? Gwyneth asked, her voice barely audible. When this aircraft touches down in Atlanta, you will be escorted off by security personnel. Your return ticket on Harper Aviation has been canceled. You are permanently banned from flying with any aircraft in our fleet. And I will be personally notifying the charter broker who booked your ticket about this incident, with a full account of your behavior. Gwyneth's face went white. You can't do that. I have meetings in Atlanta. I have a business to run. I need to get back to Miami. Then I suggest you find alternative transportation, Desmond replied calmly. You'll have plenty of options, but Harper Aviation will never be one of them again. This is disproportionate, Gwyneth protested, her voice rising again. I made a mistake. I admitted that. But to ban me permanently? To damage my professional reputation? That's going too far. Desmond's expression hardened. Is it? You tried to humiliate a child in public. You made racist assumptions, and then doubled down when confronted. You showed no remorse until you realized who I was. And even now, your primary concern isn't the harm you caused, but the inconvenience you're facing. So no, Miss Palmer, I don't think permanent consequences are too far. I think they're exactly appropriate. Preston Whitmore spoke up again. Mr. Harper is well within his rights to refuse service to anyone who violates the standards of conduct expected on his aircraft. This isn't disproportionate. If anything, it's merciful. Claudette nodded firmly. That woman should consider herself lucky. What she did to that baby deserves far worse. Gwyneth looked around the cabin, searching for support, for someone who might defend her or suggest that Desmond was overreacting. But every face she saw reflected some combination of disgust, disappointment, or carefully neutral judgment. No one was going to help her. She had burned every possible bridge in the span of 20 minutes. She sank back into her seat, her designer handbag clutched against her chest like a shield. For the first time, the full weight of her actions seemed to be penetrating her consciousness. Not just the immediate consequences, but the deeper reality of what she had revealed about herself. The ugliness she had been carrying inside, perhaps for her entire life, had been exposed in the most public way possible. Bethany approached Desmond again. "Sir, should I make an announcement about our departure?" Desmond nodded. "Yes. Let's proceed with the flight as planned. Captain Martinez, we're ready when you are." Jerome returned to the cockpit, and Bethany began her standard safety announcements. Her voice was professional, but there was a slight tremor in it that revealed how shaken she was by everything that had transpired. She had worked on hundreds of flights, but she would never forget this one. As the aircraft began to taxi toward the runway, Naomi stared out the window at the Miami skyline, receding in the distance. She felt strange, disconnected from her own body. The excitement she had felt this morning about the flight, about her cousin's wedding, about the simple joy of traveling with her father, had been poisoned by Gwyneth's hatred. "Dad," she said quietly, "why do people like her hate us so much?" It was the question Desmond had been dreading. The question every black parent eventually has to answer, knowing that no explanation will ever fully satisfy, no words will ever fully protect their child from this particular kind of pain. He took a deep breath. "She doesn't hate you specifically, baby. She doesn't even know you. What she hates is what you represent to her." "What do I represent?" "Change," Desmond said simply. "You represent a world that's different from the one she was taught to expect. A world where people like us can own jets and companies and occupy spaces that she was told belonged exclusively to people like her. Your very existence challenges everything she believes about how society should work. And instead of questioning those beliefs, she tries to push you out." Naomi absorbed this, her young mind working to understand concepts that even adults struggled to grasp. Will it always be like this? Desmond was quiet for a moment. He wanted to lie, to tell her that things would get easier, that the world would change, that she would eventually be judged only by the content of her character. But he respected his daughter too much to offer false comfort. "Sometimes it will be like this," he said honestly. "Not always. Not with everyone. You'll meet people who see you for who you really are, who treat you with the respect you deserve, who never make you feel like you need to prove your right to exist in any space. But yes, you'll also encounter people like Miss Palmer. People who will judge you before you speak a single word. People who will assume the worst because of how you look. How do you deal with it?" Naomi asked. "How do you keep going when people treat you that way?" Desmond smiled, though there was sadness in it. "I remember who I am. I remember what I've built. I remember all the people who believed in me when others said I would fail. And most importantly, I remember you. I remember that I have a daughter who's watching me, learning from me, figuring out how to navigate this complicated world. And I want to show you that you can face hatred with dignity. That you can stand up for yourself without becoming what they accuse you of being." The aircraft lifted off the runway, climbing steadily into the bright Florida sky. Naomi watched the ground fall away, the city shrinking to a miniature version of itself. She thought about Rosa Parks, the woman whose biography she had been reading. She thought about all the people throughout history who had faced far worse than what she experienced today, who had endured and resisted and persevered. "I don't want to be afraid," Naomi said. "I don't want people like her to make me scared of taking up space." "Then don't be," Desmond replied. "Be angry if you need to. Be sad. Be hurt. Those are all valid responses to what happened. But don't be afraid. Don't let anyone make you small. Because you, Naomi Harper, have just as much right to be in first class, in boardrooms, in any space you choose, as anyone else on this planet." Behind them, Gwyneth sat in rigid silence. She could hear snatches of the father-daughter conversation, and each word felt like an accusation. She tried to tell herself that she had been reasonable, that anyone would have reacted the same way, that this whole situation was a misunderstanding blown out of proportion, but the excuses rang hollow, even to her own ears. The truth was inescapable. She had revealed herself as a person who believed certain humans were inherently less valuable than others, and no amount of rationalization could erase that revelation. The Gulfstream G650 reached its cruising altitude of 41,000 feet, sailing smoothly through an ocean of blue sky dotted with cotton-white clouds. The cabin had settled into an uneasy quiet, broken only by the gentle hum of the engines and the occasional rustle of movement. Bethany moved through the cabin with a drink cart, her professional smile firmly in place despite the tension still hanging in the air. She stopped at Desmond and Naomi's row first. "Can I get you anything, Mr. Harper?" "Naomi." "Orange juice, please," Naomi said softly. "Water for me," Desmond added. "Thank you, Bethany." As Bethany prepared their drinks, Naomi noticed something. When the flight attendant reached Gwyneth's row, she moved past it without pausing, without offering anything, without even making eye contact. Gwyneth sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead, her hands folded in her lap like a child being punished. Desmond caught Naomi's observation and leaned close. "I told the crew not to provide Miss Palmer with any service during this flight. It's a small consequence, but an important one. Actions have results, sometimes immediate ones." Claudette Washington accepted a ginger ale from Bethany, then called out gently, "Sweetheart?" "Naomi." The girl turned around in her seat. "I just want you to know that you handled that situation with incredible grace. Your father should be very proud of you." "I certainly am, and I barely know you." Naomi managed a small smile. "Thank you, ma'am. My granddaughter is about your age," Claudette continued. 12, smart as a whip, and full of dreams. "And I pray every single day that the world treats her better than it treated you today. But if it doesn't, I hope she has even half your strength." The kindness broke through Naomi's careful composure. Fresh tears welled in her eyes, but these felt different, less like wounds and more like release. "I didn't feel very strong. I felt scared and small." "Being scared doesn't mean you're not strong," Claudette said. "It means you're human. Real strength is standing your ground even when you're terrified. And you did that. You didn't shrink. You didn't apologize for existing. That takes courage most adults never find." Preston Whitmore cleared his throat from across the aisle. "Naomi, I owe you an apology as well. A proper one." He unbuckled his seatbelt and moved to kneel in the aisle beside her seat, putting himself at eye level with the girl. "I'm an attorney. I spend my entire career arguing against injustice in courtrooms. But when I saw injustice happening right in front of me, I froze. I told myself it wasn't my place to get involved, that someone else would handle it, that making waves would just make things worse. Those were all excuses. I should have stood up for you immediately." Naomi looked at him, this tall, professionally dressed white man who was genuinely asking a 12-year-old girl for forgiveness. "Why didn't you?" she asked simply. Preston winced at the directness of the question. "Honestly, because it was uncomfortable. Because speaking up would have meant conflict, and I'm conditioned to avoid conflict when it doesn't directly affect me. Because deep down, some part of me wanted to believe that maybe it would just resolve itself without me having to take a stand." He paused. "Those are all terrible reasons, and I'm ashamed of every single one of them. But you spoke up eventually," Naomi said. "Eventually isn't good enough," Preston replied. "In situations like this, silence at the beginning is the same as taking the other side. I gave that woman permission to continue her attack by not immediately opposing it. That's on me." Desmond observed this exchange with a complex expression. Part of him wanted to accept Preston's apology at face value, to appreciate the man's willingness to acknowledge his failure. But another part remained skeptical, wondering if this contrition would last beyond this flight, or if Preston would return to his comfortable life and comfortable silences once the immediate discomfort passed. "Mr. Whitmore," Desmond said, "I appreciate your honesty, but I want you to understand something. This isn't an isolated incident for us. This is our lived reality. My daughter will face countless versions of what happened today throughout her life. Some will be as blatant as Miss Palmer. Others will be subtle, almost invisible, but just as damaging. And every time it happens, she'll be looking around to see who speaks up, who stands beside her, who treats her dignity as worth defending." Preston nodded solemnly. "I understand, and I commit to doing better. I know that's easy to say right now, in this moment, but I mean it." "Then prove it," Desmond said simply. "Not to me, but to yourself. The next time you witness discrimination, the next time you see someone being marginalized or attacked for who they are, speak up immediately. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Don't calculate the social cost. Just speak. Because your voice has power, especially in spaces where people who look like you are making decisions that affect people who look like us." Preston returned to his seat, visibly shaken by the conversation. He pulled out his phone, then put it away again, unable to focus on anything except the weight of what he had witnessed and his own failure to act. Naomi pulled her book from her backpack, the biography of Rosa Parks. She opened it to where she had left off, but found herself unable to concentrate on the words. Instead, she stared at the photograph on the cover. A dignified black woman sitting calmly on a bus, her expression serene and determined. "Dad," Naomi said. Mrs. Parks was scared too, wasn't she? Terrified. Desmond confirmed. She knew what refusing to give up her seat might cost her. She knew she could be arrested, beaten, or worse. But she also knew that someone had to take a stand. Someone had to say, enough is enough. How did she know it would matter? What if everyone had just ignored her? Desmond considered the question carefully. She didn't know it would matter. That's the thing about courage, sweetheart. You rarely know if your actions will change anything. You just know that staying silent is no longer an option. Rosa Parks sat down because she was tired. Not just physically tired, but tired in her soul. Tired of being treated as less than human. Tired of a system designed to diminish her. And in that moment, she decided her dignity was worth the risk. "Am I supposed to be like her?" Naomi asked, her voice small. "No," Desmond said firmly. "You're supposed to be like you." Rosa Parks didn't wake up that morning planning to change history. She was just a woman trying to get home from work. Your job isn't to be a historical figure or a symbol. Your job is to be Naomi, a smart, kind, curious girl who loves to read and dreams about the future. That's enough. That's more than enough. Naomi leaned against her father's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. The airplane continued its journey through the sky, carrying them toward Atlanta and whatever came next. Outside the window, the landscape below had changed from the dense urban sprawl of South Florida to the more rural patchwork of Central Florida's farmland and forests. In her seat behind them, Gwyneth Palmer sat motionless. No drink, no snack, no acknowledgement from the crew or fellow passengers. She had become invisible, a ghost occupying space, but not truly present. For someone who had built her entire identity around being recognized, catered to, and treated as important, this sudden erasure was devastating. She wanted to blame Desmond for being unreasonable. She wanted to blame the other passengers for not understanding her perspective. She wanted to blame the complicated state of modern society, where everything had become so sensitive, so politically correct, so impossible to navigate without offending someone. But in the enforced silence of her isolation, with hours stretching ahead and nothing to distract her from her thoughts, tiny cracks were beginning to form in her defensive armor. Small, uncomfortable questions were starting to seep through. Why had she assumed that child didn't belong in first class? What, specifically, about the girl had triggered that assumption? If Naomi had been white, would she have questioned her seating? Be honest, she told herself. Be brutally, painfully honest. The answer was no. She would not have questioned a white child in that seat. She might have found a child in first class mildly annoying, but she would have assumed the family had paid for premium seating. She would have given them the benefit of the doubt. But she had looked at Naomi and seen not an individual child, but a category, a type, someone who, in her worldview, needed to justify their presence in spaces reserved for people like Gwyneth herself. The realization made her feel sick. She glanced toward the front of the cabin, where Naomi sat reading her book, occasionally whispering something to her father. The girl looked so small, so young, so utterly harmless. What kind of person attacks a child? What kind of poison had Gwyneth been carrying inside herself that it had spilled out so easily, so viciously? Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out carefully, keeping it low so Bethany wouldn't notice, and confiscate it. Text messages from her assistant in Miami, asking about her meetings in Atlanta. Messages from colleagues. One from her mother, asking if she had landed safely. Gwyneth started to type a response, then stopped. What would she tell them? How would she explain what had happened? The truth was too humiliating. But lying would only postpone the inevitable. This kind of incident wouldn't stay quiet. There would be witnesses, reports, social media posts. Perhaps her professional reputation, which she had spent 2 decades building, had just been demolished in under an hour. And she had no one to blame but herself. The flight attendant's voice came over the intercom with a gentle chime. Ladies and gentlemen, we're currently cruising at 41,000 feet. We'll be beginning our descent into Atlanta in approximately 90 minutes. The weather there is clear with a temperature of 72 degrees. Mr. Harper, Captain Martinez would like to speak with you briefly when convenient. Desmond unbuckled his seatbelt and stood, stretching slightly. He looked down at Naomi. "I'll be right back." "Okay." She nodded, returning her attention to her book. But as soon as her father moved toward the cockpit, she felt the familiar anxiety creeping back. Without him beside her, she felt exposed, vulnerable. Claudette noticed. "Honey, would you like to come sit with me for a few minutes? We could chat. I'd love to know what you're reading." Naomi glanced back at Gwyneth, who was staring out her window, before looking at Claudette. "Okay." She gathered her book and moved to the empty seat beside the older woman. Up close, Claudette had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and her hands were weathered in a way that spoke of decades of hard work. "Rosa Parks," Claudette observed. noting the book's cover. That's powerful reading for a young person. My dad says it's important to know history, Naomi replied. Your father is absolutely right. And what do you think so far? Naomi considered the question carefully. I think she was brave. But I also think it's sad that she had to be brave just to sit on a bus. That shouldn't have required courage. It should have just been normal. Claudette smiled, impressed by the girl's insight. You're wise beyond your years, child. You're absolutely correct. The fact that basic dignity requires courage is itself an injustice. But until the world changes enough that courage isn't necessary, we need people willing to show it. Were you alive during the civil rights movement? Naomi asked. I was, Claudette confirmed. I was a young woman during the marches and protests. I saw things that would break your heart. But I also saw people coming together, standing up, refusing to accept that the world had to stay the way it was. And slowly, painfully, things began to change. But they didn't change all the way, did they? Naomi said quietly. Because what happened today wouldn't have happened if things had really changed. Claudette reached over and took Naomi's hand in her own. No, sweetheart. Things didn't change all the way. We made progress. But progress is not the same as victory. Every generation has to keep pushing, keep fighting, keep insisting that we all deserve to be treated as fully human. I'm tired of fighting, Naomi admitted, her voice breaking slightly. And I haven't even done anything yet. I'm just 12. How am I supposed to fight for my whole life? You don't fight every single day, Claudette said gently. Some days, you just live. You laugh with your friends. You read your books. You enjoy being young. The fighting comes when it needs to come. And when it does, you'll find the strength, because you'll remember who you are and what you're worth, just like you did today. In the cockpit, Desmond stood behind the captain's seat, looking out at the endless expanse of sky. Jerome had put the aircraft on autopilot and turned to face him. How are you holding up? Jerome asked. Desmond shrugged. I've dealt with worse. But I've never had to watch my daughter go through it. That's different. That hurts in a way I wasn't prepared for. She handled it remarkably well. She shouldn't have had to handle it at all, Desmond said, his voice tight with suppressed anger. She's a child. She should be worrying about homework and friends and what to wear to her cousin's wedding, not whether she's going to be attacked for sitting in a seat on her own father's airplane. Jerome nodded. I've filed the incident report. It'll be waiting when we land. Security will be ready to escort Miss Palmer off the aircraft. And I've already notified the charter broker. They were horrified. They're terminating their business relationship with her immediately. Good, Desmond said simply. Desmond, Jerome said, his voice dropping to a more personal register. Can I speak candidly? Always. I've worked for you for 8 years. I've watched you build this company with integrity and determination. I've seen you treat every employee, every client, every person who crosses your path with respect. You've created something extraordinary here. But I've also seen the toll it takes. The way you have to be perfect all the time because any mistake will be attributed to your race. The way you can never be just good enough because you're constantly proving you belong in a space that should have always been yours. Desmond listened silently. Jerome continued. What happened today with Naomi? That's not just about one racist passenger. It's about a system that makes people like Gwyneth Palmer feel entitled to challenge the presence of people like you and your daughter. And I'm sorry. As a white man who benefits from that system, even when I don't ask for those benefits, I'm sorry. Thank you, Desmond said quietly. That means something, coming from you. What are you going to tell Naomi when we land? Desmond was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the clouds. The truth, I suppose, that the world isn't fair. That she'll face this kind of hatred again, but also that she's stronger than she knows. that she has people who love her and will stand with her, and that every time someone like Gwyneth Palmer reveals themselves, it gives us an opportunity to shine a light on the poison that still exists in our society. He turned away from the window. I should get back to her. She gets anxious when I'm gone too long. Of course. We'll be starting our descent in about an hour. When Desmond returned to the cabin, he found Naomi sitting with Claudette, the two of them deep in conversation. He smiled, grateful that this woman had thought to comfort his daughter. Preston Whitmore stood as Desmond passed. "Mr. Harper, may I speak with you for a moment?" Desmond nodded, pausing in the aisle. "I want you to know that I'm planning to write about this experience," Preston said. "I'm a civil rights attorney, as I mentioned, but I also write legal analysis for several publications. This incident perfectly illustrates how discrimination persists in supposedly progressive spaces. With your permission, I'd like to document what happened today and use it as a teaching moment." Desmond studied the man carefully. "Why?" "Because silence protects the status quo," Preston replied. "And I've been silent too many times. If sharing this story might make even one person think twice before making the same assumptions Gwyneth Palmer made, then it's worth the discomfort of admitting my own failure to act." "It's not your story to tell," Desmond said bluntly. "It's my daughter's, and I won't have her trauma turned into a teaching tool without her consent." Preston nodded immediately. "You're absolutely right. I apologize. I shouldn't have assumed. If Naomi is ever willing to share her perspective, I would be honored to help amplify her voice. But only if and when she's ready." Desmond returned to his seat beside Naomi, who had moved back from Claudette's row. She leaned into him immediately, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "Dad," she said quietly, "Miss Washington told me about the civil rights movement, about all the people who fought so things would be better for us. Do you think they'd be disappointed? That after all that work, someone like that woman can still treat me that way?" Desmond considered his answer carefully. "I think they'd be proud of you, and I think they'd understand that change is slow and incomplete. Rosa Parks didn't sit on that bus thinking she was solving racism forever. She was taking one stand, in one moment, hoping it would move the world a tiny bit forward. That's all any of us can do. Take our stand, in our moment, and trust that it matters." "Does it matter?" Naomi asked. "What happened today? Does it actually change anything?" "Yes," Desmond said with certainty. "It matters because you learned that you can survive this kind of attack. It matters because the other passengers were forced to confront their own complicity or courage. It matters because Gwyneth Palmer can no longer pretend she doesn't hold these prejudices. And it matters because when you're older, you'll remember this moment, and you'll know exactly what kind of person you want to be." The aircraft began its gradual descent toward Atlanta. The flight that had started with such promise had become something else entirely. A crucible, a test, a moment that would shape how Naomi Harper understood herself and her place in the world. And somewhere behind them, Gwyneth Palmer sat alone with her thoughts, beginning the long, painful process of reckoning with who she really was beneath the veneer of sophistication and success. The Gulfstream's engines changed pitch as Captain Martinez began the descent into Atlanta's airspace. Outside the windows, the Georgia landscape emerged from beneath scattered clouds, a patchwork of green forests, red clay, and urban sprawl radiating out from the city center. Bethany moved through the cabin, checking seat belts and ensuring everything was secured for landing. When she reached Gwyneth's row, she paused, her professional training warring with her personal feelings about what this woman had done. "Seatbelt," Bethany said curtly, not bothering with pleasantries. Gwyneth complied silently, her hands shaking slightly as she fastened the buckle. She looked up at Bethany, and for a moment seemed about to say something, but the flight attendant had already moved on. Desmond felt Naomi tense beside him as the aircraft descended. She always got nervous during landings, a small quirk of her personality that made her seem younger than her 12 years. "You okay, baby?" he asked. "Yeah," she said, though her grip on the armrest said otherwise. "Dad, what's going to happen when we land?" "Security will escort Miss Palmer off the aircraft." "Well, wait until she's gone, then deplane normally. Our car will be waiting." "Well, go to the hotel. You'll put on that beautiful dress you picked out. And go celebrate your cousin's wedding. Just like we planned." "Will she get in trouble?" "Real trouble." Desmond considered how to answer. "She'll face consequences. She's banned from flying with our company." The charter broker dropped her. "Those are business consequences. But legal consequences? Probably not. What she did was hateful and wrong, but it's not technically illegal. She has the right to be a terrible person, as long as she doesn't threaten or physically harm anyone." "That doesn't seem fair." "It's not," Desmond agreed. "But social consequences can be powerful too. People in her professional network will hear about this. They'll have to decide if they want to be associated with someone who behaves this way. That kind of reputation damage can be devastating in ways that legal punishment isn't." Naomi absorbed this, watching the ground rise to meet them. "Do you think she's sorry?" "Really sorry, I mean. Not just sorry she got caught." Desmond glanced back at Gwyneth, who sat rigid in her seat, staring straight ahead. "I don't know. Maybe. People are complicated. She might be genuinely confronting her prejudices for the first time. Or she might just be upset about the consequences. Time will tell." The aircraft touched down smoothly on the runway, the wheels chirping slightly as they made contact with the tarmac. Naomi let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. They were on the ground. This flight, this awful, transformative flight, was almost over. Captain Martinez taxied the aircraft to the private aviation terminal on the south side of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Through the windows, Naomi could see two security personnel in dark uniforms waiting near a black SUV. The engines wound down to silence. Bethany stood at the front of the cabin, her hand on the door release, waiting for the signal from the cockpit that it was safe to open. Desmond unbuckled his seatbelt, but remained seated. He wanted to make sure Gwyneth understood exactly what was about to happen. "Miss Palmer," he called back to her, his voice carrying easily through the quiet cabin. Gwyneth looked up, her eyes red-rimmed, though Naomi hadn't seen her cry. "When that door opens, you will wait here until security comes aboard. You will not argue with them. You will not make a scene. You will exit this aircraft with whatever dignity you have left. Do you understand?" Gwyneth nodded mutely. "And Miss Palmer," Desmond continued, his voice softer now, "I genuinely hope you think about what happened here today. I hope you examine why you made the assumptions you made. And I hope that when you see a child, any child, in a space you think they don't belong, you pause and ask yourself why you feel that way. Because the answer won't be about them. It will always be about you." The cabin door opened with a soft hiss. One of the security personnel, a tall black man with graying temples, stepped aboard. His eyes found Desmond immediately, and he nodded with respect. "Mr. Harper, we received the incident report. We're here to escort Miss Palmer to the main terminal and ensure she leaves the airport property." "Thank you, Marcus," Desmond replied. He knew most of the security staff at the Atlanta facility. Harper Aviation had partnered with them for years. "She's in the fourth row." Marcus moved down the aisle, his partner following behind. When they reached Gwyneth's seat, Marcus spoke with professional courtesy. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to gather your belongings and come with us." Gwyneth stood on shaky legs, retrieving her designer handbag and small carry-on from the overhead compartment. Her hands fumbled with the zipper on her bag, the simple task suddenly seeming impossibly difficult. As she moved toward the exit, she stopped beside Naomi's seat. The girl looked up at her, their eyes meeting for the first time since the full revelation of Desmond's identity. "I'm sorry," Gwyneth whispered, the words barely audible. "I'm truly, deeply sorry." Naomi said nothing. She simply stared at this woman who had tried to diminish her, to erase her, to make her feel like she didn't deserve to exist in this space. And in that moment, Naomi understood something profound. This woman's hatred had nothing to do with Naomi's worth. It never had. Gwyneth continued down the aisle, her expensive heels clicking against the aircraft floor. As she reached the door, she paused and turned back one final time. "Mr. Harper, your daughter is remarkable. And I'm ashamed that I couldn't see that until it was too late." Then she was gone, escorted down the stairs by security and toward whatever consequences awaited her. The remaining passengers sat in silence for a moment, processing what they had witnessed. Finally, Claudette spoke. "Well, that was overdue about 2 hours ago, but better late than never." Preston stood and approached Desmond one more time. "Mr. Harper, I meant what I said earlier. If there's ever anything I can do to support your family or your company, please don't hesitate to reach out." He handed Desmond a business card. "And if Naomi ever wants to talk to someone about her legal rights, or if you ever need an attorney who understands civil rights issues, I'm available." Desmond accepted the card. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. I hope your actions match your words going forward." "They will," Preston promised. "I won't forget today, and I won't be silent again." One by one, the passengers deplaned. Claudette stopped to hug Naomi gently. "You keep reading those books, child. Keep learning about the warriors who came before you, and remember that you're part of that legacy now, whether you wanted to be or not." Finally, only Desmond, Naomi, and Bethany remained in the cabin. Bethany approached them, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Mr. Harper, Naomi, I cannot express how sorry I am for what happened today. I should have shut that woman down the instant she opened her mouth. I should have protected you, Naomi. You were put in an impossible position," Desmond said kindly. "Don't carry that weight." "Still," Bethany insisted, "I want you to know that I learned something today too. About courage and complicity. About when staying professional actually means staying silent about injustice. I won't make that mistake again." Naomi stood and picked up her backpack. She felt exhausted, wrung out emotionally, in a way she had never experienced before. But she also felt something else. Something unexpected. She felt powerful. Not because of what Gwyneth had lost, not because of the consequences that had been imposed, but because she had survived. She had faced hatred directed at her for no reason other than her skin color, and she had not crumbled. She had not apologized for existing. She had not internalized the message that she was somehow less than. "Dad," she said as they prepared to exit the aircraft, "can I ask you something? Always. Are you going to tell people about what happened? Like, make it public?" Desmond paused. "That's your decision, not mine. This is your story as much as it is mine." "What do you want?" Naomi thought carefully. "I think I want people to know. Not to embarrass that woman more, but because maybe it will help other kids. Maybe if parents and teachers and other adults hear about what happened, they'll think about the assumptions they make. They'll think about who they believe belongs in which spaces and why." Desmond pulled his daughter into a tight hug. "When did you get so wise?" "I learned from the best," she replied, her voice muffled against his chest. They descended the aircraft stairs into the warm Atlanta afternoon. The sun was bright, the sky clear. A black car waited on the tarmac, its driver standing beside the open rear door. As they approached the vehicle, Naomi looked back at the Gulf Stream one more time. Her father's jet, her father's company, her space, whether anyone else believed it or not. "Dad," she said, "next time we fly, can I sit in the cockpit for takeoff?" Desmond laughed, the sound carrying relief and pride and love. "Absolutely. Captain Martinez would be honored to have you." They climbed into the car, leaving the airport and the confrontation behind. But the impact of what had happened, the lessons learned, and the courage discovered, would travel with them far beyond Atlanta. 3 weeks later, Naomi sat in her father's office at Harper Aviation headquarters in Miami. The space was elegant but not ostentatious, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the company's private hangar. Models of aircraft dotted shelves alongside family photos and industry awards. On the wall behind Desmond's desk hung a framed quote: "Dignity, respect, excellence." Naomi had seen that quote countless times, but today it meant something different, something deeper. Her father was on a conference call, his voice calm and authoritative as he discussed an expansion deal with potential investors. Naomi did her homework at the small conference table in the corner, occasionally glancing up to watch him work. She felt proud, not just of what he had built, but of who he was. The call ended, and Desmond swiveled his chair to face his daughter. "How's the math going?" "Done." Naomi replied. "Miss Chen is going to be so surprised when I actually finish early for once." Desmond smiled. "You've seemed different these past few weeks. Stronger, maybe. More confident." Naomi closed her textbook thoughtfully. "I think I understand something now that I didn't before." "What's that?" "That the opinions people have about me don't define me. Like that woman on the plane. She saw me and decided I was nothing. She decided I didn't belong. She decided I was less than her. But none of that was true. None of it had anything to do with who I actually am. It was all about who she was." Desmond leaned back in his chair, studying his daughter with undisguised admiration. "That's a lesson some people spend their entire lives trying to learn. How did you figure it out so quickly?" "Because of you," Naomi said simply. "Because you showed me that you can face hatred without hating yourself. You can stand up for yourself without becoming angry and bitter. You can demand respect while still showing grace. That's what you did on that flight." A knock on the office door interrupted them. Desmond's assistant, Melanie, poked her head in. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here to see you. She says it's personal." Desmond frowned. "I don't have any appointments scheduled, I know, but she's very insistent. Her name is Gwyneth Palmer." The room went silent. Naomi's eyes widened. Desmond's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Should I send her away?" Melanie asked. Desmond looked at Naomi. "It's your choice, sweetheart. She hurt you. You don't owe her anything. If you don't want to see her, she leaves." Naomi felt her heart begin to race. Part of her wanted to say no, to keep this woman out of her life forever. But another part, the part that had been reading about Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr., and all the people who had chosen dialogue over dismissal, felt curious. "I want to hear what she has to say," Naomi decided. "But only if you're here with me. Always." Desmond promised. He turned to Melanie. "Send her in." Gwyneth Palmer looked different. Not in her clothes, which were still expensive, or her hair, which was still perfectly styled, but in her bearing. The aggressive confidence that had radiated from her on the aircraft had been replaced by something more tentative, more human. She stood in the doorway, clutching her handbag like a lifeline. "Mr. Harper, Naomi, thank you for seeing me. I know I don't deserve your time." "No," Desmond agreed bluntly. "You don't. So why are you here?" Gwyneth took a shaky breath. "Because I need to apologize. Properly. Not because I was caught or because I'm facing consequences, but because what I did was unconscionable. And you both deserve to hear that from me directly." She took a few steps into the office, but didn't presume to sit. The past 3 weeks have been the worst of my life. I lost a major client. Several business associates have distanced themselves from me. I've had to examine parts of myself that I've spent years pretending didn't exist. I'm not interested in your suffering, Desmond said coldly. If you came here looking for absolution, you're in the wrong place. I didn't, Gwyneth said quickly. I came here to tell you that you were right. About everything. You asked me on the plane what I thought you didn't look like. And the honest answer I was too ashamed to speak out loud, is that you didn't look like what I've been conditioned to believe success looks like. You didn't look like the wealthy, powerful people in my world. And that's not because of anything real. It's because my entire life, I've been surrounded by images and messages that say, success is white, that power is white, that belonging is white. She looked directly at Naomi now, tears beginning to stream down her face. And when I saw you, this beautiful, bright young girl sitting in a premium seat, some awful part of my brain said, that's wrong. Not because you had done anything wrong, but because you challenged every assumption ID ever made about who deserves access to luxury, to comfort, to respect. Naomi listened silently, her expression unreadable. Gwyneth continued. I've been in therapy 3 times a week since that flight. I've been reading books about systemic racism and implicit bias. I've been confronting the reality that I've been racist my entire life without even recognizing it. And I'm not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me or to convince you. I'm suddenly enlightened. I'm telling you because you deserve to know that your courage, both of you, forced at least one person to fundamentally change. Change is easy to claim, Desmond said. Prove it. What are you actually doing differently? Gwyneth reached into her handbag and pulled out a folder. I've enrolled in a year-long diversity and inclusion training program. I've made substantial donations to organizations fighting racial injustice. I've begun volunteering with a youth mentorship program that serves primarily Black and brown children. And I've had some very difficult conversations with my family and friends about the beliefs we've all held without question. She set the folder on Desmond's desk. These are receipts, documentation, proof that I'm not just talking. Because you're right. Words are meaningless without action. Naomi stood and walked over to her father's desk, picking up the folder. She leafed through it slowly. Bank statements showing donations, certificates of enrollment in training programs, letters from nonprofit organizations confirming volunteer hours. Finally, Naomi looked up at Gwyneth. Why should I believe any of this? You could be doing all this just to make yourself feel better. Just to tell yourself you're not a bad person. Gwyneth met the girl's gaze steadily. You're absolutely right. I can't prove my motives are pure. I can't even be certain they are. Maybe I am just doing this to assuage my guilt. But even if that's true, even if my reasons are selfish, the results are still real. Children are being mentored. Organizations are being funded. And I'm learning things that might prevent me from hurting someone else the way I hurt you. She knelt down, putting herself at eye level with Naomi. I cannot undo what I did to you. I cannot take back the words I said or the pain I caused. You will carry that memory for the rest of your life, and that is a burden you never should have been asked to bear. But if my actions from this point forward can prevent even one other child from experiencing what you went through, then maybe your suffering won't have been entirely meaningless. Naomi felt tears pricking her eyes. Not tears of sadness, but tears of something more complicated. This woman had hurt her deeply, had made her feel small and unwelcome in her own father's aircraft. And now that same woman was kneeling on the floor of her father's office, genuinely trying to make amends. I forgive you, Naomi said quietly. The words surprised her even as she spoke them. Not because you deserve it, Not because what you did was okay, but because I don't want to carry anger around for the rest of my life. I don't want what you said to define how I see myself or how I move through the world." Gwyneth's composure finally broke completely. She sobbed, not the delicate tears of someone performing emotion, but the raw, ugly crying of genuine remorse. "Thank you," she managed to say. "Thank you for being kinder than I deserve." Desmond had watched this entire exchange in silence, his protective instincts warring with his respect for his daughter's autonomy. Finally, he spoke. "Miss Palmer, my daughter has offered you something extraordinary. The question is, what will you do with it?" Gwyneth stood, wiping her eyes. "I will honor it. Every day. In every interaction. In every choice I make about how I treat people who don't look like me. I swear to you both, I will spend the rest of my life being better than I was that day." She moved toward the door, then paused and turned back. "Naomi, I know this probably doesn't mean much, but you are going to change the world. You're going to do extraordinary things, and when you do, I hope you'll remember that even people like me, people who hurt you, are capable of learning and growing. Because if I can change, anyone can." After Gwyneth left, Naomi and Desmond sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, Naomi spoke. "Do you think she meant it?" "All of it. I think she meant it today," Desmond replied carefully. "Whether she'll continue meaning it in a month, a year, 10 years? That remains to be seen. But that's not your responsibility. You gave her something powerful by forgiving her. What she does with that gift is up to her." Naomi walked to the window, looking out at the aircraft in the hangar below. A Harper Aviation jet was being prepared for a flight, mechanics and crew moving around it with practiced efficiency. Her father's company, her father's dream made real through determination and brilliance, and refusing to accept the limitations others tried to impose. "Dad," she said, "I want to fly more. I want to learn everything about aviation. I want to become a pilot someday." Desmond joined her at the window, placing his hand on her shoulder. "Then you will. And you'll be extraordinary at it. And when I'm a pilot, I want to make sure every kid who boards my flights feels welcome, feels like they belong. I don't want anyone to ever feel the way I felt that day." "That's a beautiful goal, sweetheart. The world needs more people who lead with that kind of compassion." Naomi leaned against her father, watching the sun set over the airfield. She thought about Rosa Parks, sitting on that bus. She thought about all the people throughout history who had faced hatred and responded with courage, and she thought about Gwyneth Palmer, struggling to become someone better than who she had been. "Dad, do you think people can really change? Like, fundamentally change who they are?" Desmond considered the question carefully. "I think people can change their actions and their choices. Whether they can change their fundamental nature, I'm not sure. But ultimately, what matters more is behavior. If someone acts with kindness and respect consistently, does it matter what they feel in their heart of hearts?" "I think it does," Naomi said thoughtfully. "Because if you're only acting kind but still thinking hateful thoughts, eventually those thoughts will come out. Maybe not as dramatically as they did with Miss Palmer, but in small ways. In microaggressions and assumptions, and all the little things that add up over time." "You're right," Desmond agreed. "Real change requires both internal transformation and external action, which is why Miss Palmer's journey is just beginning. She's taken some important first steps, but the real test will be whether she continues when it becomes difficult, when the novelty wears off, and she has to do the hard work of confronting her biases every single day for the rest of her life." Naomi turned away from the window to face her father directly. "Thank you for being my dad. Thank you for showing me how to stand up for myself without losing my humanity. Thank you for building something so incredible that I never have to wonder if I belong in spaces like first-class cabins or boardrooms or anywhere else. Because I know that if you can do it, so can I. Desmond felt emotion tighten his throat. Naomi, you are the best thing I've ever created. Better than this company. Better than every aircraft in that hangar. You are brilliant and kind and strong. And you're right, you can do anything. Not because of what I've built, but because of who you are. They stood together at the window as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of gold and amber. Outside, a Harper Aviation jet taxied toward the runway, its lights blinking against the gathering dusk. Inside, a father and daughter who had faced hatred together and emerged stronger, more connected, more certain of who they were and what they stood for. The story that had begun with humiliation and pain had transformed into something else. A lesson about courage. A meditation on forgiveness. A testament to the power of standing firm in the face of prejudice. And most importantly, a reminder that dignity is not something that can be taken away by others. It can only be surrendered. And Naomi Harper would never surrender hers. Now I want to hear from you. Have you or someone you know ever experienced discrimination like what Naomi went through? Comment below and share your story. And here's a question for reflection. Do you think Gwyneth deserved forgiveness, or was Naomi too generous? Drop a comment with your honest thoughts. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Subscribe to this channel if you believe in stories that expose injustice and celebrate the strength of people who refuse to be diminished by it. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, you belong everywhere you choose to be. No one can take that from you. Until next time, stand tall, stand proud, and never let anyone make you feel like you're less than extraordinary. Take care. This powerful story teaches us several profound truths about dignity, prejudice, and human resilience. First, assumptions based on appearance reveal more about the person making them than the person being judged. Gwyneth's instant dismissal of Naomi exposed her own internalized biases, not any actual deficiency in the child. Second, silence in the face of injustice is itself a form of participation. Preston's initial reluctance to speak up allowed the abuse to continue, demonstrating that bystanders have a moral obligation to intervene. Third, maintaining composure when facing hatred is not weakness but tremendous strength. Desmond's calm, measured response proved far more effective than rage would have been. Fourth, children absorb how adults handle discrimination, learning either to shrink from confrontation or stand firm in their worth. Naomi's growth throughout this experience shows how crucial parental modeling is. Fifth, consequences matter. Allowing bad behavior to go unchecked only perpetuates it. Desmond's decision to ban Gwyneth permanently sent a clear message about accountability. Sixth, forgiveness is a personal choice that serves the forgiver more than the forgiven. Naomi's decision to forgive freed her from carrying perpetual anger. Finally, real change requires both internal examination and external action. Gwyneth's journey reminds us that confronting our prejudices is ongoing work, not a one-time revelation. These lessons extend far beyond one airplane incident, offering guidance for navigating a world where discrimination still thrives despite progress. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed someone being discriminated against and wished you had spoken up? Comment below and tell us what you would do differently after hearing Naomi's story. Do you think Desmond was right to ban Gwyneth permanently? Or should he have shown more mercy? Drop your honest opinion in the comments. If you believe that every child deserves to feel safe and welcome regardless of their skin color, smash that like button right now. Share this video with someone who needs to understand how their assumptions might be hurting others. And subscribe to this channel if you want more stories that shine a light on injustice while celebrating the courage of people who refuse to be diminished. Thank you so much for watching this powerful story. Remember, you have the right to exist in any space with dignity and respect. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. Stand tall, stand proud, and be the change you want to see in the world. Until next time, keep fighting for justice, keep speaking up for those who need your voice, and keep believing that we can build a better, more inclusive world together. Take care and stay strong.